Um, okay, again, thank you so much. And it's a privilege to be able to share some thoughts with you this afternoon on Christian nationalism in the West, and specifically its implications for minorities. And just to give you a little introduction to myself, I'm an American, Indian American, but I also happen to live in Singapore, where I teach at a university here. And my specialization is in public policy and global affairs. I'm a political scientist by profession. And so the way I attempt to make sense of Christian nationalism or religion in general is to bring the methods and tools of social science to bear on these questions. And so that's what I've been doing for my career. And I've recently started getting into Christian nationalism as a topic of inquiry. I find it to be very troubling and also fascinating at the same time. So I'm going to share the outline of my talk. This will not take very long. I'd like to save the bulk of the time for discussion. In the first part of my talk, I'll address the question of what is Christian nationalism. I think it's important to have a proper working definition of Christian nationalism, the object of today's discussion. So I'll attempt to give you my definition of Christian nationalism. The second part of the talk, I will discuss, again, very briefly, Christian nationalism in the West. One of the important things that's going on with Christian nationalism today is that it's spreading. So it's not solely an American phenomenon, not solely a Western phenomenon, but we see it in various parts of the world, whether it's the Americas, Europe, Africa, or even Asia. But I'll focus here on the West since that is the topic of discussion today. Then I'll discuss the consequences of Christian nationalism specifically for minorities, and then I will briefly conclude. Okay, so first, what is Christian nationalism? It's not an easy question to answer because there are many different definitions of Christian nationalism. But the simplest way of thinking about it is that it is an ideology of Christian supremacy in society and politics. Okay, an ideology of Christian supremacy in society and politics. So that's kind of a very basic way to think about what Christian nationalism is. But more specifically, we can say that Christian nationalism is both a political ideology and cultural framework. And it's a political ideology and cultural framework advocating for the fusion of a particular form of Christianity and a country's civic life and political institutions. Christian nationalism also calls for a privileged place for that specific form of Christianity in the public square. Okay, so that's a more specific definition of Christian nationalism, and the one that I will be operating from this afternoon. Christian nationalism is both descriptive and prescriptive. It is descriptive in the sense that Christian nationalists believe that their countries are defined by Christianity and that their governments and citizens should take steps to keep it that way. So that's the prescriptive part of Christian nationalism. And scholars have linked Christian nationalism to a whole array of social and political beliefs: racism, misogyny, pro-authoritarianism, homophobia, opposition to vaccinations, especially in the wake of the COVID pandemic, skepticism towards science, and sympathy to violence. So that's essentially Christian nationalism in a nutshell. So let's talk about Christian nationalism in the West. And one of the issues with the Christian nationalism literature is that it tends to focus very heavily on the United States, and that perhaps gives the impression that Christian nationalism is an American problem. But the fact of the matter is that we see Christian nationalism surging all around the world and in various parts of the West. So, to give a few examples, of course, Christian nationalism is probably most closely associated with politics and religion in the United States, where Christian nationalism has been blamed for political and social outcomes as diverse as the 2021 Capitol insurrection, the overturning of the 1973 Roe Wade court decision banning, legalizing abortion, mass shootings around the country, the rise of Donald Trump, and increasing political polarization. But we also see Christian nationalism in other countries and parts of the world. So in Europe, we see a different form of Christian nationalism than exists in the United States. Whereas Christian nationalism in the United States tends to be more creedal in expression, anchored in an ideology proclaiming that God has uniquely blessed the country for a divinely ordained mission in the world, Christian nationalism in Europe tends to be expressed in terms of identity rather than belief. Okay, so it's more of a cultural expression of Christian nationalism. It's a marker of identity. So it might be more useful to think of Christian nationalism in Europe as Christian civilizationalism rather than nationalism per se. And here, Christianity serves as a marker of communal belonging, underscoring the continent's common Christian civilizational identity. And we also see Christian nationalism emerging in various countries in Latin America, like Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. In Brazil, Christian nationalism thrived in the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, a conservative Catholic who claimed to govern with the guidance of God in accordance with the Judeo-Christian tradition. He ran for president in 2018, and his campaign platform was Brazil before everything and God above all. And he easily won the 2018 presidential election, owing in large part to the widespread support he received from Brazil's evangelical population. Okay, so here are three prominent examples of Christian nationalist political leaders. On the top left, we have Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil. Beneath him, we see Viktor Orban of Hungary, and of course, American President Donald Trump. And I think one important question that this raises is how Christian is Christian nationalism? Because you can make a very strong argument that Christian nationalism is a secular rather than religious ideology. And that's an argument that I've been making. And if it's true that Christian nationalism is a secular ideology rather than a religious ideology, this means that anyone can be a Christian nationalist, regardless of their own personal faith commitments. Okay, so what does Christian nationalism mean for minorities? So I think it has a lot of implications for minorities, but I'm going to just highlight two of the more important ones. The first is that it undermines minority rights in democracies. And it does this in two ways. First, it attempts to establish the hegemony of Christianity. And because Christian nationalism prioritizes power and control over others, Christian nationalists support political candidates who promise to protect or restore the hegemony of Christianity, regardless of these politicians' commitment to democratic norms and institutions. So here we can again consider the case of Brazil and its former president Jair Bolsonaro. Known as the Trump of the tropics, Bolsonaro came to power through the massive outpouring of support he received from the country's diverse Christian communities. Despite referring to Hitler as a great strategist and his denunciation of indigenous people as parasites, Brazilian Christian nationalists rallied to Bolsonaro owing to his perceived defense of Christian values and moral agenda. And under Bolsonaro, Brazil took a sharp authoritarian turn. He spoke admiringly of Brazil's murderous military dictatorship, and he militarized his own cabinet, with nearly half of appointees hailing from the armed forces. One of his sons even recommended reinstituting a dictatorship-era decree that would have closed down the national and state legislatures, suspended constitutional rights, and prohibited political protests. These moves, though, met with little resistance from Bolsonaro's Christian supporters, and in some cases they were roundly applauded. Bolsonaro rewarded his Christian base with tax exemptions, ministerial appointments, and an evangelical Supreme Court justice. Of course, during his time in office, Bolsonaro faced a bevy of criminal investigations, corruption allegations, and impeachment appeals. So that's the first way that Christian nationalism undermines democratic rights by attempting to establish the hegemony of Christianity. But the second way that Christian nationalism undermines minority rights is through the repression of minorities. So it's not just about establishing the hegemony of a particular form of Christianity, but also about repressing those who do not fit that definition of Christianity. And so Christian nationalism jettisons the principle of democratic equality insofar as it is an ideology seeking to maintain Christianity's dominant status in society. For Christian nationalists, only some people are considered true citizens of a country. And to Christian nationalists, the presence and growth of minority faith traditions powerfully symbolizes how once Christian communities and countries are turning their backs on the one true God and are at risk of losing their divine favor. And so Christian nationalists again tend to throw their support behind illiberal political leaders who vow to protect Christianity from would-be usurpers. In turn, Christian nationalist political leaders attach themselves to dominant forms of Christianity as a means to secure political bargains. So the point here is that there is this grand bargain that's taking place between the major Christian institutions and leaders of a country and political leaders. Each side sees a win in this grand bargain. So an example here would be the case of Europe, where many European states have enacted anti-democratic restrictions on the rights of minority communities, especially Muslims and Jews. One of the most visible manifestations of anti-minority bias involves increasing restrictions on the wearing of religious dress in public spaces, especially Islamic face veils. And these restrictions are sometimes known as burqa bans, and we see them in different parts of Europe and to different degrees, but increasing as well. So it's a troubling development, I think, that we're seeing in various European states. So if the first consequence of Christian nationalism for minorities is that it deprives minorities of democratic rights, the second consequence is that it promotes anti-minority violence. And here we can think about the case of the United States. According to a 2023 survey of more than 6,000 Americans, adherents of Christian nationalism are almost 7 times as likely as rejectors of Christian nationalism to support political violence, including anti-minority violence. So why is Christian nationalism a violence-prone ideology? Well, in the case of the United States, I would argue it's a violence-prone ideology for four reasons. First is biblical literalism. Christian nationalists tend to be biblical literalists who draw parallels between the ancient Israelites and present-day America. Just as the Israelites miraculously conquered their enemies, the United States today, as a new chosen people, operating under the same providence of God, must at times engage in sacred violence against the enemies of God, foreign or domestic, just as the Israelites did in the Hebrew scriptures. And those enemies of God can include racial and religious minorities. Second, Christian nationalists believe that America's founding fathers and founding documents were divinely inspired. Consequently, they romanticize the violence of the American Revolution and glorify the American founders as agents of God, believing they have a responsibility to sustain their vision for the country through the use of patriotic violence if necessary. Third, a significant proportion of American Christian nationalists see themselves as involved in a literal battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And they, of course, see themselves as being on the side of good. And so they demonize their enemies as demonic or satanic. So this gives a spiritual aura to worldly political conflicts. And then finally, Christian nationalists have made common cause with some far-right white supremacist groups such as the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, and QAnon. And according to polling, white Americans who agree with the statement that God intended America to be a promised land for European Christians were more than 4 times as likely as those who disagreed with that statement to believe that true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save the country. And so the point here is that Christian nationalism has served as a common framework uniting all these far-right movements. So this is a recent paper that I published on Christian nationalism and violence against religious minorities in the United States. And in this paper, I expound upon these arguments. And what I show is that Christian nationalist rhetoric on the part of American politicians corresponds to increasing levels of anti-minority violence in the American states against Muslims, against Jews, and against other religious minorities. So if you want to check out that paper, it is freely available online. It is open access, so you can just go ahead and Google that if you're interested. Okay, now in the case of Europe, I think we also see increasing anti-minority violence that is often justified in the name of Christianity. The theological justification tends to be quite different in the case of Europe. Christian nationalism tends to be expressed more as a cultural identity in Europe rather than a theological framework, but the implications for minorities tend to be the same. The Pew Research Center documents that Europe's level of social hostilities involving religion increased by a factor of 4 between the years 2007 and 2018. And the vast majority of countries in Europe had higher levels of violent religious hostilities last year than they did in 2007. So we see this in numerous countries: Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Spain, Sweden, and even Germany, where all of you are today. The rise in hate crimes comes amid a surge in popularity for far-right political parties. So why do we see increasing violence against religious minorities in Europe? I would argue that this anti-minority culture is sustained by three different things. The first is a broad majoritarian coalition that consists of secular politicians, right-wing extremists, populists, and Christian civilizationalists, all of who consider the presence and practices of minority religious communities to threaten their country's national cultures and identities. The second factor that sustains the anti-minority culture is political developments, right? So when it comes to political developments like the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID pandemic, or the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, minorities are often scapegoated, and this can increase anti-minority violence against them. And then finally, this anti-minority culture is sustained by discriminatory laws and policies um, towards minority outgroups. For example, in France, state policies grounded in laïcité have served to alienate Muslim communities from the fabric of French life, give rise to an increasingly radical right populist political movement, promote discrimination against Muslims, and provide a fertile breeding ground for attacks against French Muslim communities. Okay, so with that, I think I will go ahead and wrap up my presentation. So in conclusion, I will say that Christian nationalism, with its rising global influence, poses significant threats, not only to democratic values, but also to the safety and rights of minority groups. By promoting the supremacy of one religious group, this ideology undermines the principles of equality and inclusion that are essential to a diverse society. Whether through political actions, legal restrictions, or direct acts of violence, the impact of Christian nationalism on minorities is profound and often devastating. Across various countries, from the United States to Europe, from Uganda to Brazil, Christian nationalism fuels intolerance and legitimizes discrimination against vulnerable communities. It creates an environment in which the voices and rights of non-Christians and minority faith groups are marginalized and their physical safety sometimes jeopardized. From political leaders exploiting religious rhetoric to justify authoritarian measures to the rise in violent hate crimes against Muslims, Jews, and LGBT individuals, the consequences are deeply concerning. This ideology not only threatens the democratic fabric of societies, but also jeopardizes the spirit of coexistence that allows for cultural and religious diversity to flourish. As the world grapples with these challenges, it is crucial to engage in open, honest conversations about the implications of Christian nationalism and work towards protecting the rights and dignity of all people, regardless of their faith, identity, or background. The fight against the rise of Christian nationalism is ultimately a fight for a more just, inclusive, and peaceful future. Okay, so with that, I will end my comments and I look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nilay. I think we will. It was very great and very effective to hear this, because I think we get the most important informations regarding this topic. And I, for myself, have one question, but I'm just the moderator in this case, and I want to step aside and give the members and also Sir Aston the first question. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank you very much for your talk. As a scholar of Catholic theology, I agree with your definition of Christian nationalism.
My question concerns, have you a good explanation why Christian nationalism become a very strong development and is a very strong issue nowadays? Of course, we
Yes.
have nationalism in the 19th century. We have nationalism round about the world, in India, for example, in the 20th century, in Japan, for example, etc., etc. But do you have an explanation why it becomes a so explosive issue now?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, this is a good question. Thank you for raising that. Um, so in the context of global nationalism, religious nationalism in general is a pretty new development, right? So we've seen it greatly increase since the 1970s. And so the question is, why now? And I think that Christian nationalism is a backlash. And it's a backlash to different political and social developments that have been occurring around the world at the same time. First, it's a backlash against globalization. So with globalization, we see the increasing diversification of society, resulting in many more points of potential conflict between different religious groups. You know, Europe is much more diverse today than it was in the 1970s. The same is true of the United States and even Latin America. And so I think that's one thing is that it's a reaction to multiculturalism and pluralism. And so when Christian nationalists in these places see different faith traditions coming into their countries, they're not very happy about it, and they see this as their countries turning their back on the one true God. So let me give you a very recent example. Just yesterday, I believe the US House of Representatives invited a Sikh to give the invocation, opening the session of the House. And this caused a major, major uproar among Christian nationalists in the United States that a Sikh individual would be invited to give the opening prayer um, at the House of Representatives. And Christian nationalist politicians like Mary Miller of Illinois were greatly upset about this. And she essentially said the United States is a Christian nation, so why are we inviting a Muslim to give this invocation? Now, this individual was not a Muslim, but she didn't know any better. She doesn't know the difference between Muslims and Sikhs, so she just assumed that he was a Muslim. But I think this kind of thinking is very prevalent throughout the United States and perhaps even in Europe as well. So that's the first development, increasing multiculturalism. The second is that Christian nationalism can be understood as a response to increasing secular progressivism. Okay, so I mentioned in my comments the Roe Wade court decision that legalized abortion in the United States in 1973. We see increasing LGBTQ rights and so forth. A galvanizing issue for Christian nationalists, of course, has been the whole trans issue. And Christian nationalists are very worked up about this as well. So that's a second development. And then a third, I think, broader development is what I would call the global crisis of secularism. So around the world, we see religion-state ties becoming increasingly entangled, and this is something that's been happening for a couple decades now. But I think the world is less politically secular today than at any point in the past 40 years or so. And so this naturally feeds into ideologies like Christian nationalism and other forms of religious nationalism as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nilay. So, do you have a follow-up?
Later on.
Okay, later on. I think, yeah, Anja has a question. Anja is also a member from us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm a big fan of practical solutions. So what would you suggest for us as a member of a minority to react or respond to this Catholic nationalism? How should we act to not give this like more heat, or what would you suggest us to do?
Okay, it's a difficult question to answer because I'm not so sure there's much that you can do, because I think ultimately defeating Christian nationalism has to arise from a Christian discourse itself. And it has to come out of the same vectors of Christianity that are giving rise to Christian nationalism in the first place. So in the United States, this would include evangelical, fundamentalist, charismatic, and Pentecostal Christianity. And so there has to be a counter narrative that arises from within the Christian discourse itself that can argue why Christian nationalism is anti-Christian, that it's a theological heresy. Now, with that being said, I do think that there is one thing that minorities can do, and that is to insist on interreligious dialogue, which is very important. And what interreligious dialogue can do is it humanizes the other, right? So when communities are isolated into echo chambers and they have little cross cultural contact, this allows for suspicion and distrust and prejudice to breed. But when different religious communities interact with each other, it has the effect of humanizing the other. And people tend not to see different religious communities as enemies. They may not agree on matters of faith and practice, which is totally fine. But the point is that we should be creating cultures of tolerance. So here I can give you an example of the country where I live, Singapore. Singapore is a very multicultural society. We have many different nationalities that live in this tiny island city state, whether it's Indians or Chinese or Malay or Indonesians, Filipinos, Westerners. We all tend to live together in harmony and peace. We have lots of religious communities here in Singapore. We have Christians, Muslims, we have secularists, Buddhists, Taoists, and many, many others, Sikhs, Hindus, and so forth. And what's interesting about Singapore is because land is so scarce, people literally have to live on top of each other in condos or government housing, and this results in different people of faith having constant interactions with those who are different than they are. And the result is, I think, is this broad humanizing of other people. There is no isolation of religious communities in Singapore. It's impossible. And so people tend not to see different religions, ethnicities, races, or nationalities as enemies, but rather as friends. So there's a general spirit of harmony and tolerance that you find in Singapore. And I think other countries can learn a lot from the Singaporean experience.
Yeah, very great. And that's also a reason why we invite you to give us some good advices from there. I mean it really true, because we have problems in here. But I think we discussed today in the morning, or it was in my morning, we discussed about the question regarding the models in France and in Germany for a secular state, or the relationship between state and religion or religious communities. And we also mentioned that, or we distinguish a little bit in short words. And my question would be, I know you are from Singapore and an American citizen, but I think you know also something about Germany. And Sir Essen wrote so much about this topic, secularism and the method of relationship between state and religion. And what do you think? How do you do we have some critics about Germany or something you would appreciate, or what do you think about our model in Germany and also in France? Turkey, you have also in Turkey
Yeah.
like in France.
I think in terms of religion-state arrangements, Germany is in a better place than either France or Turkey. And the reason I say that is because I think there's in France and in Turkey, you find this approach to religion called laïcité. And the idea in both of these countries is that you need to banish religion and religious symbols from public life. And that isn't necessarily the case in Germany. So I think, you know, the broader environment of religious freedom um, can be helpful to defeating Christian nationalism. Um, and so what's interesting in the German context is that you see a very strong counter narrative to Christian nationalism arising from within the Christian churches. And you see this in Germany to an extent that you don't see it in, say, France or even the United States. And so it's very interesting. Why is it that you see this counter narrative emerging within Christianity in Germany, but not in other places? Well, I think you know, it's an interesting question, but one of the things that I would point to here is German history, right? So, of course, as you all are well aware, during the rise of the Nazi Party, some Christian churches were complicit in their through their silence in abetting the rise of the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler. And some of these churches were in fact co-opted by the German state. And so, of course, German Christians know this history very well, and they're determined not to allow something like that to happen again. And so they've been very outspoken, prophetically so, um, in their denunciations against Christian nationalism. Unfortunately, this is something that we haven't seen to such a large extent in the United States. But you know, Germany has certain advantages that you don't find in other countries. It has strong civic institutions. It has courageous Christian leaders. Another thing is that there's also this Christian political party where you know Christians can work through. And I think, you know, you just recently elected a new chancellor who's from the Christian Democratic Union. So having a Christian political party here can actually be helpful in that sense as well. But
Yeah.
I'm saying all this as an outsider. I don't really know that much about Germany. So these are all comments that are just, you know, coming from an outsider.
Well, but sometimes outsiders are very clearly and can sharpen the discussion. So I accept and agree with your arguments. I will add one more specific argument concerning the major churches, Protestant and Catholic one in Germany. And there is a difference to other countries, and that is that all the leaders of the church, the priests, are academic professionalized. They have an academic professionalization. They study theology at a state university, and that makes a difference. So that the inside and outside perspective is present in their academic studies. So we have a type and character of bishops, even or priests, who are able to reflect uh, uh, problems in our society. And they have no fear, they can express themselves, they speak the same language. So I think this academic professionalization is a very hot and very important item. And now we see in the last observation, now we see the same development according to our Muslim tradition and groups living here. That more and more institutes and faculties of Muslim, Islamic theology are established at state university. I belong to the Humboldt University in Berlin, and there is an institute of Islamic theology even here in Hamburg, etc. And this is very important. Also, the question, what can we do at a minority group? This growing up self-reflection on an academic basic level is very important to the problems and to overcome them.
Yeah, Nilay, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Professor Essen just said. And I also wanted to raise this idea of what's called the religious vaccination effect. And I think we see this in Germany to an extent that we may not see it in other countries. And the idea is that the deeper one's knowledge of their own religious tradition, the more likely they are to resist vices like nationalism, discrimination, prejudice, and even violence. And one of the problems that I see in the United States as an American is that from the pulpits to the pews, there is a very strong lack of theological depth. It is really concerning that many of the people in the United States who are pushing Christian nationalism are the Christian leaders themselves, right? And I think, again, to echo the professor's point, theological training is very important here in resisting Christian nationalism.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nilay, for the response. And we have some questions also. Nilay, you just told me if you are out of time, because we are just going forward, because we have a Saturday here and we have very much time. So we enjoy it very much to discuss with you. And we have now from our members and I want to introduce Kerem Adigüzel. He is from Switzerland, and he's also a theologist and mathematics. And he wrote also a book regarding how you read the Quran on your own. He gives advices. So he will tell you more about his background, and he has also a question to you and Sir Essen, I think.
Well, hi, Nilay. Many thanks for your presentation and your arguments. Enlightening. I am very active in the interreligious dialogue in Switzerland, different cities. I'm one of the co-founders of our religious organization, and I also would like to stress the fact that also in Switzerland it was very important because of the religious conflicts we had during the last 2 centuries, especially, that state-approved theological education was very vital in the peacemaking in the society. So that's one of the main points which were very successful in Switzerland. But of course, we have also the Bible Belt, we call in Switzerland, across St. Gall, and different cities where a lot of evangelical parties are like grouping up and supporting Christian nationalism, as I talked about. And what I wanted to ask you about is what you portray seem to be something very generalized, which could apply to many different religions. Like we could talk about Muslim nationalism, especially in Turkey, of course, Hindu nationalism, or even Sikh nationalism in different parts of the globe. So it seems to me that there's a pattern going on, which it seems to be very human, connected to the searching for meaning, the differential ideologies rising up in different parts of the globe. And when I compare it with what I know a little bit of Swiss history, is we had this going back and forth between opening up and closing it up again, so closing down again. So, for example, with the Christian discussion and discourses, the Catholics and the liberals in Switzerland, especially, they were fighting each other in a war, so-called Sonderbundskrieg. And this main solution was then to integrate the opponents politically. And this seems to be a recurring part of human history. Like we fight what we don't want, and then we have to integrate it, and then we fight again, and then we integrate it and fight again. So what I want to ask is, what can we do to integrate more, and also especially in a society where religion seems to be going into the background. Like in Switzerland, we have over 30% non-religious people, and the number is rising. A lot more people are abandoning the church or the mosques. Also the same. A study from the University of Lucerne showed that less and less people engage in religious activities. And so you said interreligious dialogue is important, but with the rising numbers to non-religious communities, it seems to be a little bit difficult to counter the narrative from a religious perspective. Like, I mean, we can do that, but less people seem to listen to that. So there should be a way to get to the people in some different ways, different like way of speaking, language, and so on. So I know it's a very broad topic, but I wanted to hear your thoughts about it. Excuse me if I broadened the topic too much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please, Nilay, it's yours. You are muted.
Yes, thank you for those comments. You raised many different issues. One is whether what we're seeing is unique to the Christian majority countries, or is it something that we're seeing happen around the world? And I would argue that it's definitely something that is occurring around the world and is not specific to Christian majority countries. Hindutva, Hindu nationalism in India. We see various forms of resurgent Muslim nationalism in countries like Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia. Of course, Jewish nationalism in Israel. And we even see Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Myanmar. So there's something that is going on globally that is affecting all of the world's major religious traditions, including Christianity. And again, so what I would say is that it is a global crisis of secularism, where we see this kind of backlash against minorities around the world. But what's important is that we don't necessarily see it in every single country. So there are certain countries that have been relatively immune to religious nationalism, while others have become mired in it. So the question here is, what do these countries have that may be lacking in countries where we see resurgent religious nationalism. And, surprisingly, one of the regions of the world that is remarkably free of religious nationalism and religious conflict is sub-Saharan Africa. And you may not necessarily think that would be true because this is also one of the world's poorest regions. And yet, in many countries like Botswana and Lesotho and Angola, Namibia, and others, we see relative harmony between the different religious communities. And so, what's going on in this part of the world? Well, I think one is that religious institutions in sub-Saharan Africa have not insisted on close ties with the state. And so this has kind of prevented the politicizing of Christianity or Islam or other religions. And it has not, you don't see the same kind of Christian nationalism in this part of the world that you find in the West. There are other countries that provide some positive examples as well, countries like Senegal and Sierra Leone, both of which are Muslim majority countries, but you don't see religious nationalism in these places either. And this past week, I was just in Ethiopia, and my hosts in Ethiopia were adamant that Ethiopia was the most peaceful place in the world when it came to religious tensions, because you just don't find conflict between Muslims and Christians in Ethiopia. So yeah, just some random thoughts there. Why do we see religious nationalism now? I mentioned that it's a type of backlash against globalization and cultural progressivism, but it's also part of a general religious resurgence that has been occurring around the world since the 1970s. And this religious resurgence itself is a type of backlash against the failures of secular nationalism and the promises of secular leaders like those in Turkey or Iran or Iraq or even India. And so we see this general religious resurgence occurring since the 1970s all around the world. And people are looking for answers. And so they have returned to primordial concerns like ethnicity and religion. So I think I'll stop there. I've been rambling enough. But yeah, thank you for those remarks.
Yeah, thank you also, Nilay. We have more questions now from Nadia. She's a scholar in PhD, sorry. And she also is discussed later with us on the podium. And she has also a question. And after her, also Regine from Büllen. And she also has a question. So please. Just talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really great. I enjoyed it a lot. I have a quick question. So I come from a background of psychology, and so what I always think of is that there's a lot of great research in psychology about groupthink and the idea of us versus them. And what I think is that the enemy has to be designed so that the picture of the enemy, the other, has to be actively designed by someone. So I think the idea is that to me it seems a lot it's pushed by media, by social media. And how do you see the role of social media in creating images of the enemy, of the others as bad or stupid, or and how do we paint our picture as the chosen one, or the better people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point about social media. And the problem with social media is that it's completely unregulated, right? It's like the Wild West, and people can say whatever they want, and others who don't know any better will buy into those narratives that they're seeing on social media. Um, Another issue with social media is that it can be a place where people can come together and even plan um, riots or violence in advance. We've seen this in India, where Hindu vigilantes have come together on social media and then planned in advance attacks against minority religious groups like Muslims and Christians. So social media is, I think, it's very problematic, and I have no answer for what to do about it, except to regulate it more heavily. But I think another problem is not just social media, but national media, right? And so in the United States, I can tell you that um, news organizations like Fox News and some of the newer right-wing television news outlets have given a voice to Christian nationalism, and they invite prominent Christian nationalists onto their television shows, who give their narrative without being cross-checked. And so, because so many people get their information from these right-wing news sources, they fall victim, I think, to this us versus them mentality that you mentioned. And so we see it happening in many different areas: social media, national media, and other places as well.
But I also see in this development is a total disregard for facts. That people do not care about the facts, and that it's more important how you feel about something than what actually happening. So how do you see this, and how do you think we can battle that?
Yeah. So I think this goes back to a point that has been raised at a few different points, and it's the importance of theological training, and especially in one's own theological tradition. And what's interesting here is there has been quite a bit of research that's been done on how a deep knowledge of the Christian tradition leaves people to be less vulnerable to the claims of Christian nationalists. And I would argue this is because Christian nationalism is a very anti-Christian ideology, right? It goes against the most basic teachings of Christ, found in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5 through 7. And so when it comes to Christian nationalism, you'll never hear them talk about Jesus. You'll never hear them talk about the Golden Rule, the Sermon on the Mount, or anything like that. And so because people have such a shallow understanding of their faith, they can easily fall victim to the arguments that are made by Christian nationalists.
Thank you so much.
And that's just another form of this, religious vaccination effect.
Yeah. Thank you, Nilay. So we have the last question from Regine.
Okay, so this is Regine from Berlin. I'd like to know about the relationship of Christian nationalism with Jews or Judaism, because I see that on the one hand, there's sometimes that favorite connection to the current Israeli government, or you also mentioned that they refer to that traditional role of the Jews in the Bible, but on the other hand, I remember some sentences like the Jew Soros wants to exchange the population. That is one sentence that I really had in my mind because it was so absurd, but maybe you can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I caught very little of that question. I heard you say something about Israel. And but
Was
yes.
it the voice, or what was the problem? The voice, or?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you were breaking up and I couldn't catch all of the
Okay.
question.
Okay, I say it again. The connection between the Christian nationalism and Jews or Judaism, because I think there are some, they refer, as you said, to some biblical stories about the Jews as the chosen people, and I think
Yeah.
there's also some connection with that Israeli government. That's also with Netanyahu, similar
Yeah.
to some of the other autocrats. But on the other hand, I remember one sentence that someone in Germany said, and in translation it would be something like, the Jew Soros wants to exchange the population. That's a very absurd sentence, but that's how they seem to think. So maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, so I think what you're asking about is this connection between Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism, right? And I think, am I right on that, right?
Yeah, more or less. So, I think
Okay.
there are some contradictory. I think there is a contradictory relationship, but maybe you can say something about that because I think you know better than me.
Yeah, so I think two different things. Number one is that Christian nationalism can be a very anti-Semitic ideology. And so Christian nationalists sometimes see Judaism as a target, and they will actively target Jews, maybe not physically, but they see Jews as encroaching on the proper terrain of majority Christians, right? So even Trump, when he was in office the first time around, would sometimes tweet anti-Semitic material. Um, and so this is especially prominent where you see connections being made between Christian nationalists and far right groups like QAnon and the Three Percenters and the Oath Keepers and so forth. But there's another thing going on here, and it's that some Christian nationalists are also Christian Zionists. And they support Netanyahu, as you mentioned, and the Israeli government for theological reasons. They, first of all, see Israel as being the recipient of an eternal covenant with God, and they hearken to Bible verses like Genesis 12:3, I will bless those that bless you and curse those who curse you. And they would make an argument that the United States must support Israel if it's to receive the blessings of God. But then there's also this group of Christian Zionists who support Israel for different reasons, for apocalyptic reasons. They see support of Israel as being important to hasten the return of Christ. And their interpretation of the Bible and passages in Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation holds that Israel is absolutely central to the end of days. And so they're actually pushing for conflict in the Middle East. They get excited when they hear about terrorist attacks and wars and violence in the region. And so they're doing whatever they can to bring about Armageddon. So you have these various, different factions when it comes to Israel. You have some who are just overtly anti-Semitic. And then you have some who are very pro-Israel, but are also at the same time anti-Semitic because they believe that the Jews we completely wiped from the face of the earth after Armageddon. So it's very interesting, but it shows the complexity of this issue and how Christian nationalists relate to Israel.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions for the public? Yeah.
I wanted to give one remark about the importance of state-approved education. What I see with Muslim theology or Islamic theology is that it tends to be the opposite, except it happens in Switzerland or Germany or in other some like other states which do have the history of, oh, we had to learn about it the hard way, so we have to make sure that we don't like overlook different traditions and the diversity of religious study. It tends to be that a lot of imams educated in Turkey or Saudi Arabia and so on really lack what you described as the deep knowledge of the religious traditions and the diversity of the sciences behind the religious studies. So what I tend to see is that when I speak to imams from Bosnia, from Turkey, from Albania, from different countries, that they really lack not just knowledge, but also like I would describe it in terms of an inner worldview of the others and of how religion works and how it relates to the human condition. So I would see it as a different topic for a broad, like most of the Muslim countries. Some countries are quite good in it, but this seems to be the exception. And that's my perception. I wanted to know what you think about it, if you think there are some developments going on. Like I really like what is going on in Switzerland and Germany, more in Germany than Switzerland. And I have a little bit hope that it could be like very, very bright for the future, but it seems to be in Turkey, especially like, yeah, I don't really have any hopes regarding the academic basis of the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with that comment completely. And I think in general, religion flourishes when it is detached from the state. And you know, you raised this point about religious education, you know, being run by the state, and it's problematic for a number of different reasons. You know, in Europe, uh, you know, when church and state were tightly integrated, it tends to create a lazy kind of religious establishment, right? Because the churches become distracted from their missions. They have to worry about currying the favor of the state rather than being focused on their missions of evangelization and so forth. And in the Muslim world, you know, when clerics are getting their sermons directly from the state, you know, it really works against this idea of having a deep theological knowledge. So I agree with that completely. And I actually did a study on this in the Christian world. And what I found is that the integration of church and state in Christian majority countries actually leads to these countries becoming less Christian over time. They secularize over time. For a number of different reasons. Again, one is that the churches become distracted from their missions. Number two is that if they take on nationalism in their theologies, then that nationalism becomes a form of idolatry. And so they see the nation state as the highest calling that they have and not necessarily their own faith. And so the closer that church and state are integrated, the less dynamic religion is in those countries. And I'm sure that you would find the same thing in the Muslim world as well.
Okay, one last question from me, then I'll follow up. Is that it seems to be that you have to be disintegrated in some way when it comes to religion and state, but not disengaged. Especially when I look back in the history, what I really cherish are people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for example. who were very deeply religious in their own way and very vocal against their own security, safety. So what would be an ideal way for you to be for religious organizations and communities to be politically engaged, but not integrated in state affairs?
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it? And exactly how you can maintain that separation, but also remain engaged, I think, is a balancing act that different religious communities have to find. I think it's important that religious communities not baptize any political leader or political party as being divinely ordained, right? Because when that happens, it becomes a slippery slope into Christian nationalism. And there are many ways that that Christian communities can retain their faithful presence and their prophetic witness without being co-opted by the state. I think that's the key point, is that once the religious communities become co-opted by the state or integrated with the state, that's when they lose their prophetic voice. And I'll give you an example of the Mennonites in the United States. Of course, this is a group that comes from Germany originally. And they're pacifists, and they're nonviolent resistors. They refuse to become integrated with the state, but their distance from the state has actually empowered them to do a lot of good around the world through the Mennonite Central Committee. And so we see Mennonites acting as peacemakers and peacekeepers in parts of Africa. They have engaged in reconciliation practices in Latin America, in Asia. And it's precisely because they are detached from any particular state that they have credibility to be able to engage in these functions. So I think, that's just one example. But the key is, I think, not to, baptize any particular political leader, political party, or the nation state itself as being Christian, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nilay. I want to thank you very much for all the answers and input we get from you. It was so great. From my perspective, I want to mention just two phenomena I experienced it these days, or I saw in Germany. We have, for example, the far-right party AfD, which is very popular in East Germany. And also the history of East Germany. It was the DDR. It was a communist socialist state before. And we have the rise of the AfD in East Germany very much. And it's totally similar to what you say, because you said the difference between Christian nationalism in America and Europe is identity. And we have this identity search or claiming that they are so Christian and so West in East Germany, but they didn't have for years, or I think most of the population, the connection to the church. It was, you have maybe, I don't know it in details, but it's so suspect, because you have these people who lived so much in communist systems and now are claiming so much on Christian as a religion, but I think in practice that's the first phenomena I saw. And the second is we have at this moment a rise of anti-migrant and anti-asylum seekers politics in Germany. Also, the CDU is making some strong moves in this way. And we have also here conflicts between government politicians from the CDU, which are from a Christian party. They say maybe to the church, Catholic Church, okay, don't involve so much in our politics, you know. It's a kind of suspect because it's a Christian party who says to the church, okay, please stay aside, this is our field. So we have phenomena which are so suspect at this time. And what I want to add a question to you, because you saw America and you see Singapore, and my question is for Germany, for example, we have the problem of unity in Germany. We have in France the system you mentioned, but maybe you have some unity. You saw it in football. Football team is very multicultural, and they are together, and they are for the nation. In Germany, we have the problem. We don't have this unity so much. I think we have a good system. It's in practice very good, but you don't feel in the daily life the unity between the people. And what can you lessons from America and from Singapore on this term of unity? How we can find unity in Germany? I mean, how we can contribute to this?
Yeah, I think that unity is it's a worthwhile goal.
Yeah.
But it can also be overly ambitious, right?
Yeah.
I think that the goal should be maybe tolerance and respect. You have to get to those most basic things first before you can strive for unity. And eventually you can get to unity in diversity. But I'm actually more optimistic about where Germany is headed than some other countries in Europe, because it seems to me as an outsider that you have that that kind of general sense of tolerance between religious groups. Now, of course, the rise of the AfD is problematic, and but what I also see is that religious leaders, both Christians and Muslims, are speaking out against AfD, right? Even though the AfD is attempting to co-opt religious language and religious symbols for its own political purposes, you see it being resisted in a way from religious communities that you don't see Trumpism in the United States being resisted, right? So I think that that is a positive development, but in some sense, you can never have full unity, full religious unity in a religiously diverse society. And that's because in any liberal society, people will never be able to agree on first principles, right? And what I mean by that is the different religious groups in society will have their own versions of truth. And they will never be able to agree on what that truth is, right? And you'll see this even within the Christian tradition itself, right? So within Christianity, we have three major denominations or sects, the Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians. But even within those Christian denominations, we have numerous splits and points of contention. Within Protestantism, we have so many different denominations, and these Christian groups have been arguing about everything related to theology since the very beginning, right? So in that kind of sense, I don't think that you can get to a perfect kind of unity, which is perfectly fine. But if you can reach a threshold of interreligious respect and tolerance, I think that is sufficient.
Yeah, sure. That's very true. And my view on this is also that we have to learn some. Maybe the lost unity of America, we should learn from this, because my view on America is that it exists, or it exists in unity in America. Even you are Latin or from Europe or Christian or Muslim, you're American. And a little bit I missed it in Germany. So we can, I mean this, we need this unity in being German, and it don't have to be only an ethnic understanding of being German for the future, also for today, because Germany is as such multicultural country, and yeah, we have to speak also about this, because being part of a nation also means having a different background. No, and I think this is what we can learn from America, and maybe also from Singapore, because you told us also Singapore is very multicultural, and yeah, that's what I want just to say, and yeah.
I think, you know, it requires people to resist the temptation of looking to the state to privilege their own particular religious tradition, right? And yeah, if you can get to that point, then it's possible for societies and for countries to flourish.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much, Nilay. I think we are all a little bit hungry, and maybe we need a little bit to make a pause. So I thank you very much, Nilay, for being with us, for giving us this input, and giving us so long answers to our questions, and having the time for us. And yeah, I think he needs yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun, and my only regret is that we were not able to do this in person, but hopefully next time. I'd love
I hope
to
so.
come see you in Germany someday.
Yeah, yeah, you are invited. Come to Hamburg, come to Berlin. We will enjoy very much to spend time with you and to host you here. Germany is a great place. Don't miss it. And also, if we find time, we will come to Singapore. I look forward to go there, because I love to experience also the cities of the world which are so developed. Yeah, I was in Copenhagen. It's also a very great place, very developed, and I love to see these countries. Yeah, people can make very great circumstances if they want to. No, it's everything is possible. Yeah. Okay, some last words from the audience. Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much. We will stay in contact, Nilay, and let's have a follow up. I will call, and let's stay in contact.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nilay. Have a nice, great night. Good night.
Right.